Bill Muehlenberg, how are you doing?
Hey, very well, thanks.
It's good. Thanks for coming and chatting with us at the Looking Glass.
It's been a while. I think you may have been one of my students many decades ago, somewhere back in the 1920s or something.
Yep, definitely. I remember doing theology down at PCV. I've I've sold you, and forgive me for this, but as one of the most hated anti-woke, anti-Marxist activists of modern times in Victoria. And
That's probably accurate, yeah.
but let me hear your background of what you've been up to over the last 20 years and before, if that's significant.
Yep. Oh, well, as you can probably tell, or your listeners can, originally from the U.S., but married to an Australian. We met in Europe, came here about 32 years ago, so Melbourne has been home ever since. As you know me, had taught at a number of the Bible colleges in Melbourne, theology, apologetics, ethics, various things, and worked with a number of the kind of conservative think tanks or family groups or lobby groups, so made the rounds. Where do we begin? I was with the Australian Family Association for a while, Salt Shakers, the ethics group, Focus on the Family I was with for a while. I actually worked at Quadrant magazine for a bit, Institute of Public Affairs for a bit. So yeah, a lot of the conservative groups, some more Christian than others, some more secular than others. So yeah, did that for quite a while and had quite a bit of a media presence for a long time with the secular media, getting radio, TV, newspaper interviews, certainly almost every day on family issues. But about 15 years ago, started a thing called Culture Watch. Basically, just a website, interactive website. Have about 5,500 articles in that 15 years. So every day at least, I try to get a new one up. Sometimes more. We just hit about 80,000 published comments on the website. There'd be tens of thousands I can't print. As you say, a hated guy, you get a lot of vile, hate-filled, and pretty disgusting comments that are not fit for public consumption. So 80,000 we managed to print. So yeah, it covers the range: theology, culture wars, ethics. Certainly did a lot on the Rona, the virus of the last 15 to 18 months. In fact, I've done over 100 articles just on that, raising all kinds of issues and questions. Are we having too much government overreach? Are we losing too many freedoms and so on? So yeah, 15 years, that's pretty much been my main thing. Culture Watch, I do a lot of speaking and stuff here and there, although with the Rona and the lockdowns, I was supposed to have been in Perth last weekend. That was cancelled. Rural Victoria the week before, that was cancelled. But I'm hoping this coming weekend I'll make it to another gig in the west of Victoria. So depends. We got these power-hungry premiers in their own little fiefdoms who love locking down. As we speak, half of the nation is in lockdown, even though we have a handful of cases. So it's all good fun. So at least working from home in that sense, if you're locked down 23 hours a day, it's kind of like doing what you always were doing.
It's good that I hear you've got the honorary badge of being banned from Facebook as well.
Yes, that's been over a month now. I've had a lot of jail terms with Facebook, but now they seem to have, as far as I can tell, given me the flick altogether. At first, they talked about a 90-day ban for my sins, which, by the way, of course, they haven't told me what my sins are, so I have no idea what I've done, so I can't do any penance if I haven't found out my errors. But it seems they've taken my entire personal page down and everything with it, so I can't even get access to anything. So I'm not sure if there will be any future with Facebook. In the meantime, you use the alternatives, so on Gab and Parler and MeWe and Minds, anything to get the word out, which is my passion. Share truth in a world starved of truth. So yeah, Facebook is my latest uh, thing that I've gotten upset. I seem to be offending people all the time. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, true. So, if I remember correctly, I was in your class probably about 2005, maybe. And back then, around that time, there was a lot of things going on in Victoria. The thing that mainly comes to mind, and I want to start with, um, in the realm of government overreach, is the abortion laws in Victoria. Victoria was the first state to bring in basically abortion up till birth. They have a caveat of two or more doctors signing off on an abortion post 24 weeks. But basically, at the time, it was a big deal, especially in Christian and conservative communities. Um, I personally see that as the watershed moment where government stepped up and said, we're now the people who tell everybody else who's human and who isn't. And you were involved in that space as well at that time. Can you tell us a bit about your experiences around then?
Yeah, well, that is, as you say, a watershed issue. It's one of the defining issues, right? If we can't even treat the unborn, the most vulnerable, the most innocent, and if we can't start there, right? Social justice begins in the womb. If we can't begin there, why talk about any justice issue? Why talk about anything, right? If you can't even have the right to live, to become born into the human race, well, you're not going to get far with any other rights talk. So it is crucial. And yeah, I've been involved, obviously, with the pro-life movement for the 30 odd years that I've been here. I've written a number of books on ethical issues. So one of them is on abortion, another one I have on euthanasia, some on things like homosexuality. So yeah, it's a crucial issue. In a sense, of course, there was open or room to move on abortion before this law. That was true of most of the states. But what this did was really, well, not only further codify into law the state's position on this, but it really made it indeed open slather. So that law was passed 2008. And at the time, it was probably one of the most liberalized abortion laws, not just in Australia, but in the whole world. I mean, it was really hardcore, as you say, right up to birth. Basically, any reason. I mean, even if you put little provisos in there, the health of the mother, well, yeah, what does that mean? It's so broad, the definition. Oh, I can't go back to work. I can't earn money. This kid is hindering my career. Well, that's considered a threat to the health of at least the mother's psychological or emotional well-being, right? So there's no actual, she's not going to die tomorrow. She may not get back to her job next week if she does carry to term her baby. But that's what it is. It's so far open that, yeah, for any reason, for any time in the full 9 months, usually as a matter of after the fact contraception, yeah, abortion is fully legal in Victoria, and well, one amendment after another was introduced during the time of that debate. We had so many, at least make it a little bit less horrible. I mean, as if, can you make killing babies any less horrible? But different things, whether, things having to do with fetal pain or really full consent, really telling the mother what exactly the options are. All of that was knocked back. So this was the Andrews government. We have now the Labour government, a very pro-death government. Same with euthanasia, same with everything, really. They're pushing a very dark anti-life agenda. So yeah, I was there fighting that as long as I could, as were many others. And ever since then, every October, we have a March for the Babies, which commemorates the 2008 decision. So, yeah, we've done that now for 12, 13 years as well. And, yeah, it's always the case when a law goes through, it's much harder to undo it, right? Better to prevent bad laws from coming into place in the first instance. So now, is it impossible to turn it around? No, we can, if who knows, change the government and change your fortune and a lot of prayer. Maybe we can undo some of the damage, but at the moment, Victoria really is leading the way in so many things that not just Christians. I mean, there's, as I mentioned in my book, there's secular, even atheist pro-life groups out there,
Mm.
right? Atheists for life. So it's a huge issue, and just one of many, sadly, that those of us living in Victoria are having to deal with.
One of the things that I said around that time to the people that I was talking to was that it's such a watershed event, as I said before, but you can't go back now. Like, you can repeal the law, of course, or you can amend it or change it. But the psychological effect of a government deciding, in effect, the
Yep,
human status of a person, you can't break that psychological barrier that's already been broken down now. The legislative part of government, state government, mind you, not even federal government, the state government having that power to change law to effectively let law guide who is defined as a human being and who isn't. I mean, that just, I know it's a little bit of a faux pas, but takes me back to the Second World War and the legislation that was passed in Germany to make Jews and gypsies and homosexuals not human anymore. Just
yep,
take that right away from them. And so, one of the things I wanted to concentrate, and the reason why I chose such a explosive issue or such a passionate issue, is because I found that the argumentation on both sides kind of missed the point for me, in the sense that identifying what the actual problem was difficult. And so it was a lot about the rights of a mother and talking about someone who had been raped. I mean, we can have that conversation, but for me, it was about legally letting people, professionals, take the lives of their patients.
yep.
And so for me, that was the issue.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's a huge issue, and what you began with is what we call the normative effects of the law. Whenever a government passes law, it sends a message. It tells you something. It says, we think these are good things. These are values we endorse, we promote. So whenever something may have been illegal in the past and it becomes legalized, that sends, as you say, a strong social, psychological message. Well, look, the state thinks it's cool now, so I guess it's cool. I mean, if the government okays it, why not? So that is always a danger in, laws by the state basically overriding either long-term historical laws going back millennia, or individual conscience and so on. You don't even have to bring in the religious discussion here. The Hippocratic Oath, right? Go back about what 2,500 years. The first principle there, which was taught in all medical schools for ages, do no harm, right? So both abortion and euthanasia 2,500 years ago by secular Greeks were seen to be morally wrong, and medicine should not be involved in that kind of activity. So obviously, when the state does get involved in that activity, it sends a strong message. It's telling people, well, yeah, maybe in the past they thought it was wrong, but we enlightened moderns, we know better, and it's fine. Go for it, no issue. So here we can talk about three functions of the law. A law always tends to do one of three things. It can prohibit something, which abortion, things like homosexuality, so many other issues for so long were prohibited, or it can go the next step, permit something, right? Well, okay, we're going to decriminalize it. We won't throw you in jail, but we're not going to actively push it. But usually what happens when you start permitting what was once prohibited is soon enough, right? It becomes promoted. then the government gets into the game of, hey, this is now law. This is not just something that's legal. You have a right to do it.
Mm.
And when you have a right to do something, that means others have a responsibility to make sure that right goes through. So let's say you have a Christian or even a conscientious chemist who doesn't want to sell morning after pills in his pharmacy, right? Again, you can be a secular guy who's got issues with it. When you have a law like this go through, then there's a follow through effect. All the other things have to get into place. If you are a pharmacist, you have to sell this. Somebody comes in, says, "Can I have the morning after pill?" or contraceptives of various kinds, some of which are abortifacients. Well, then the pharmacist or the nurse or whoever has to do it. Otherwise, you're found to be working against this newly declared right. 2008, we said you have a right to do this. So who are you as a pharmacist or whatever to not allow others to exercise their rights? So it's all about rights talk. Almost nothing about responsibility. In the past, good government always balanced rights and responsibilities. You couldn't just push the one, you'd have to have both. But
Mm.
today it's all about rights, individual autonomy, my choice. Well, of course, in here, to make it clear to what's happening, you have two people who walk into an abortion mill. If it's successful, one person walks out alive. The other one is back in there dead. So where's the choice of that second human being? And again, any embryology textbook tells you, from the moment of conception, this is a genetically unique, one-off, distinct human being. It's not part of the mother. It's a completely separate entity having a short-term housing and feeding in mom, but otherwise a complete distinct individual. So what about their right to life? What about their choices? So again, we focus on adult whims and rights. Same with things like the homosexual marriage debate. We lose A, responsibility, but B, the rights of others their rights are being infringed when we give special rights to other groups.
Yeah, and that's what I've noticed with subsequent legislations in Victoria. It's not just permitting something; it's creating a protected class of people.
Yep.
And so, in the way that the abortion legislation worked out is that it had flow-on effects to how hospitals had to run, how
Yep.
clinics had to run. It then stifled freedom of speech by creating a space around abortion clinics that you can't um,
Yep.
protest in front of or other things like that. And so um, what I noticed in Victoria was it's not just law, it's actual social construction.
Yep. Yep.
And a lot of that social construction tends to be persecutory of not just the Christian, although the Christian is the typical one that's presented because they have traditional views and conservative views, but anyone who's traditional, they don't have to be Catholic.
Yep.
And trying to change those views into a new value, a new morality.
Yeah, well, that's it. In a democracy, you're always juggling rights with different groups of people. You have, at the very least, majority rights, minority rights. How do you juggle those two? So again, whenever you give special rights, and this especially comes into the play with the homosexual debate, when you grant special rights to a small group of people, that will impact on everybody else, for good or ill. Some may think they're going to benefit or gain by it, but others will certainly lose. Some of their rights will be taken away. I mean, everything we've seen, not just here, but in the US and elsewhere, as soon as homosexual marriage goes through, for example, right? Bake my damn cake. This whole idea. I'm going to go into a Christian, I know he's a Christian. I'm going to go into his bakery, his cake shop, and demand that you bake me a lesbian wedding cake, knowing full well, A, there's 10 other bakeries in the same area would be happy to do it for you. But B, because it's going to conflict with his conscience, he probably will say no. And then these guys will go after him, and they'll have the full weight of the law on their side, right? It's now not just, oh, we've got our right to marry, but now we're taking away your right as a conscientious cake maker or a florist or a photographer or a wedding caterer, whatever the case may be. Their rights are now under restriction or being jeopardized. In fact, we've had people jailed, thrown in prison for times, fined, losing their jobs, you name it, all these implications for wanting to be true to your conscience or your faith or your convictions. So you grant these rights here. Others are going to either lose them or be under, as you say, persecution. The state will side with one group over against other groups. So my second book, I actually did 2.5 books on homosexuality. In my second, I simply document about 200 cases of people fined, thrown in jail, losing their job, kicked out of Facebook. Now, who could that be? Who gets kicked out of Facebook? Books being banned by Amazon, videos being taken down by YouTube. You know, it can be soft tyranny, you know, Facebook bans, YouTube bans, Twitter bans, or it can be worse. If we get into COVID later, I mean, you know, I got a pastor friend who just came out of 3 weeks in jail here in Melbourne for daring to hold a worship service on a Sunday, right? The state has said you can't do it. It's a non-essential service. However, we can have pubs open. We can have brothels open. We can have sporting events. We can have Black Lives Matter marches, massing in the streets of Victoria, but you dare not have your church open. So again, there's always competing rights claims, and a good government, a fair government, will try to weigh up all the different groups, try to get some sort of balance or equity there. But an activist, often secular left government, is pushing for one group only, all their mates and their buddies, and they're quite happy to penalize and persecute anyone who dares to differ. So that's a worry.
So we've had obviously 2008, we had the abortion legislation go through in Victoria. You've mentioned the same-sex marriage that was, what was that, 2015, 2016?
Yep.
Somewhere around there. We also had in Victoria legislation surrounding legalization of assisted suicide, euthanasia.
Yep.
We've also had a slew of legislation that's been passed quite recently under these strenuous conditions of the lockdown scenario with the Rona around anti-conversion laws. So in India, they use anti-conversion laws to suppress someone from changing one religion into another.
Yep.
In Australia, they use similar laws, but it's almost like they're treating homosexuality as, again, this protected group that is being protected against the really bad, evil Christian people who can't even pray for them or anything, even with their consent.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the most shocking of the many laws that Dan Andrews has pushed through with the help of his 3 buddies in the upper house, these, you know, so-called independents, crossbenchers, who are simply cutting dirty deals with Dan Andrews, right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So Dan says, look, you vote for this and other bills, including more emergency powers. Now he wants permanent emergency powers in Victoria. You know, dictatorship for life. That's what he wants. And his 3 mates in the upper house give it to him. And he'll give them a few, you know, one of them's a sex party, other is the animal justice party. I mean, anyway. So, yeah, you have this situation now with the so-called anti-conversion therapy laws, which were passed. If a homosexual or somebody with same-sex attraction comes to me or to you or to a pastor or a counselor or basically anybody and says, you know, I got a few questions about this. I'm not necessarily happy with this. Can we talk about this? Maybe you could pray for me. Maybe you could counsel me. That is now not only illegal, 100% in Victoria. You can go to jail for 10 years. If I simply say, hey, brother, can I pray for you for 5 seconds, you know? which, by the way, makes it, we got to be more careful. If somebody knocks on my door tomorrow and says, hey, man, I hear you pray for people like me. Can I get some prayer? I got to suss them out a little bit because it could be a setup job very easily, deliberate attempt to frame me. So even if it's legit, somebody else could find out, report me. I could be in jail, not just Facebook jail now, but 10 years in the slammer. I mean, just think about it for a moment. To actually, somebody wants a bit of counsel, whether or not you pray, just wants, I want to talk about this. That is now illegal. We have such a protected species with the whole homosexual trans minority that anyone who dares to even think differently, it's not just actions now, they're thought crimes, hate speech. To even think that you can pray for somebody, this is hateful, right? In the past, if somebody killed you or stole from you, that was a crime. Now they're targeting your very thoughts, your very motivations. So, yeah, it's scary stuff. That's why people say, why are you involved in the culture wars? Well, come on. Everything we talked about, if that doesn't get you a little bit excited, what will? I mean, you mentioned Germany in the 30s and 40s, and as you say, in a sense, we're not supposed to, right? But, well, look, there's a thing called learning from the lessons of history. And I've had a lot of people, it's not just me, who are very concerned, and they're saying, gee, a lot of what we did see in Germany in the 30s, I'm seeing happen now, whether it's with the Rona, whether it's with all these other agenda items, the whole woke situation we find everywhere, even with capitalism and corporations, identity politics, critical race theory, intersectionality, we can go on and on. They're saying, wait a minute, this is very similar. You mentioned the euthanasia laws and others. Well, gypsies, Jews being killed by the Nazis. Well, there was whole classes of people. The mentally defective, physically defective. If they weren't part of the perfect master race, blonde-haired, blue-eyed German, Aryan stock, well, they were bumping off everybody. And medical and scientific elites were up to their necks in affirming what the Nazis were doing, working with them. You had the occasional brave champion. You had Bonhoeffer, you had Niemöller, and Sophie Scholl and the White Rose movement. I've actually, if we're not getting too far off here, started a whole new section on my website called resistance theory. The theory that is there ever a place, at least for Christians, where you can disobey government, where you have to say no to the state to say yes to God. So obviously Sophie and Hans Scholl, she was beheaded by the Nazis at 21 years of age, her brother at 23. Bonhoeffer, of course, was also killed by the Nazis. They were resisting an evil, tyrannical government, and they did so out of their Christian conviction. This is not right. When the state usurps the role of God, as you say, it starts to decide who can live and who can die, which is exactly what it does with the abortion legislation and so on. Well, then, not just Christians, even non-Christians have to ask, is there a time and a place? Civil disobedience, saying no to the state. Like my friend Paul, 3 weeks in jail for keeping his church open on a Sunday. So these, we are moving in some pretty hardcore times. So it's not amiss to look at Germany in the 30s and say, are there parallels today that we need to watch out for?
Have you noticed, I don't know if you've been keeping up to date with what's been going on in Canada, but in Canada it seems worse than Victoria, but they both are rhyming. So the Canadian, especially in Calgary and I can't remember the other place, but there seems to be a very targeted, not only formal persecution of Christians, but also informal persecution of Christians, where after these church pastors are being imprisoned or arrested, people are coming and burning their sheds or smashing their cars and things like that and sending them.
Yep.
So you've got this tandem sort of a government that is doing what at least some elements, if not the majority of society, actually are supporting them to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Canada is bad news. If you had to compare it and say who's the worst, it'd be hard pressed. Victoria, Canada, there's a few other candidates there, but yeah, bad news. Very hostile, very secular state, really clamping down on Christians. Of course, we could go on another whole tangent. Yeah, I wonder if they'd ever do that with Muslims, but that's another issue. The truth is, it's open season on Christians, and it's getting worse by the day, whether it's through legislation or social pressure. And again, the whole Rona thing we could bring in here if we wanted. Um, as I say, I've written over 100 articles on this since last March. One of the first pieces I did, I wrote, I don't know if I was being prophetic, I simply knew history. I said, look, what the state always loves is a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a crisis, either exploit a crisis, or if you have to, manufacture, create a crisis. Doesn't matter. Make up a crisis, exploit it to the max, do fear mongering, panic porn, send the sheeple into hysteria. Oh, we got to do something. We're all going to die, right? Chicken Little. So you can get away with anything. The government can take away all your freedoms, all your rights, lock you in your home 23 hours a day, let you go 5Ks only, as if the Rona is, it's bad news at 5Ks, 6Ks, it's okay, 24 hours, that's no good, they're making this up as they go along. But the point is that the masses are so afraid and so buying into the panic porn, they're accepting it. It's not as if the governments are these big evil people doing these horrible things. They keep getting voted back in. Dan Andrews gets voted back in. Palaszczuk gets voted back in. McGowan gets voted back in, right? The people love it this way. I think there's a verse in Jeremiah about that. It's the perfect storm. The government will take a crisis, exploit it to the max. The people say, oh, thank you. We're so grateful. You're keeping us safe. We will do anything as long as you keep us safe. So, you can see where all this is heading. So whether it's the militant homosexual lobby, the pro-death lobby, the new trans moon battery, the climate change cultists, you could call them, the critical race theory. I mean, it all springs really from the same forebears. You can go back to Marx and cultural Marxism, neo-Marxism, the Frankfurt School, right? You got the whole line, and it all is one big happy family. So what Marx wanted to do by guns and tanks and force of arms, well, it's now being done in the institutions, right? Target the culture, forget about economics. That didn't quite work. Marx predicted the workers would spontaneously rise up in revolution. Never happened, partly because capitalism was such a good thing. The workers were doing better under the free market. Instead of being the lower class, they were becoming middle class. They were getting upper class. So Marx's whole theory was wrong, but they didn't stop there. Marcuse and Gramsci and the others, okay, change the focus from economics to culture. Do the same thing. Agitate get everybody upset and discontent. That's what's called critical theory. Let's criticize everything. Try to pinpoint the faults of everything. And it's, of course, the West. White male Westerners. We're the bad guys. Find out everything is, systemic racism, sexism, you name it. Intersectionality is just piling one source of oppression upon another. So they're doing the same thing Marx and Lenin wanted to do, and probably being much more successful. It's evolution from within instead of revolution from without. But for not just Christians, but anybody who A, values freedom, B, values a bit of difference of thought, and C, is concerned about the rise of statism. These are really scary times. Just, wherever I look, I'm thinking, wow, this is madness. So I'm doing my bit to sound the alarm. Why do I have 5,500 articles on my website? I got nothing better to do. Well, I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about my culture. And if some people can heed the alarm or, wake up a bit and share it with others, well, I'm doing a little bit, but we all need to speak out a whole lot more before we lose it all.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to show the listeners of the Looking Glass that their entry point to activism or being aware that rights are being taken away has largely been surrounded around the corona lockdowns and other things like that. Whereas as we've been talking about a history of 20 years plus of
Yep.
fights for um, keeping freedom and keeping an ironically an equal society. So, in other words, in 2020, another thing that Andrew's government pushed through was an equality bill that was basically introducing intersectionality so that every single independent entity, like a business, has to submit a an audit of their gender equality and what they've done and their compliance audit, like each month or something like that, or so basically taking critical race theory and making every single business overwhelmed to the point of threatening their existence, their ability to conduct a business if they don't
Yep.
toe the line with these radical agendas. And this is what I'm seeing is that Rona has really brought it to the surface, but this has been going on for a long time since the very start with the abortion. The issue not really so much affecting women as much as what was being said at the time, but really the main issue that was being affected was the hospitals and the clinics and the
Yep.
nurses and the healthcare professionals and the doctors. And it bleeds into the um, the establishment, the establishments that sort of are the place markers of our culture.
Yep. Yep.
And so now that it's going into private business, everything around Rona that Dan's doing, I see as just a gut punch to small businesses, trying to destroy small business and move people into being employed in these much bigger businesses that are far more easy to um, threaten, far more
Yep.
easy to put policy in place because you've got a bureaucratic structure in those big businesses already. And it's in that bureaucratic structure that people don't care about each other. They're just names on a page.
Yep. Yep. Now, oh well, it's part of what we call woke capitalism. It used to be the good guys, the businesses, corporations were standing between the state and the naked individual. But what happens when big business gets in bed with the big state and ends up doing their bidding? So, as you say, I have all these qualifications even to get in a job, right? You have 2 weeks of diversity training and everything else before you can even, make your widgets or whatever your job is. You have to go through all this mandatory groupthink and re-education to make sure you're not going to offend anybody. Sure, you can offend Christians, white males, that's obvious, but anybody else, you have to be trained and guaranteed that you will toe the party line. You will not do anything that's going to bother anybody who's pushing all these agendas. So when I speak on things like, say, the trans agenda and how that's being pushed, and I mention often, well, it's personal for me. My own doctor, a long time, my own personal physician, young Asian fellow, his story is now public, so I've written him up. A young family guy, wife, 2 kids. He was my doctor, great doctor, always did a great job. Everybody loved him. About almost 2 years ago now, he wasn't my doctor anymore. What's going on? The medical board of Victoria decided he could not be a doctor. Oh, what did he do? What evil did he do? Rape a patient? Steal the money from the doctor's collective? No, much, much worse. He posted politically incorrect things on his own personal Facebook page and on my website. So for that sin of actually commenting on my site, his page, stuff like, oh, I think children deserve a mom and a dad. I think marriage is between a man and a woman. I think it's not good to kill unborn babies. What everybody would have thought until recently was absolutely correct. for simply saying stuff like that, he is now out of work. He's on Centrelink trying to feed his family, and that was my doctor. But yeah, it's everywhere now. So I'll speak on trans or something, then it always happens at the end of the meeting. I'll get somebody who works in medicine or healthcare or you name it, any government body, saying, yeah, they've told me I cannot speak against anything. The trans issue, if I'm uncomfortable calling a guy who's clearly a guy, a she or a her, mispronoun somebody, I can lose my job. So I can't do anything. I'm over a barrel. Either I toe the line with all the PC nonsense they're pushing, and most recently the trans and all the rest, or I'm out of work. And there's so many people like that. And again, tied into the Rona. Mandatory vaccines now for aged care workers. Some studies are showing as many as 25% of aged care workers would rather quit than be forced to get the mandatory jab. So again, these are livelihoods we're talking about. Vaccine passports, right? The right to travel, education, enter a restaurant, go to a sporting event, go to a concert. All of that is being taken away. So we are creating a two-tiered society. There's the guys who are in the good books doing the right thing, and there's all the rest. And again, we talked about this before. It's creating different classes of people. In the old days, blacks were non-persons. Last century, Jews were non-persons. This century, the unborn are non-persons. And now, those who don't go along with whatever reason, and they often can be good reasons, the Rona agenda, increasingly they are non-persons. Sorry, buddy, you cannot travel, you cannot buy, you cannot sell. You start to think, didn't I read something about, Book of Revelation, Mark of the Beast? I mean, I'm not saying it is, but boy, there sure sounds like there's a few connections going on here, where your very livelihood, your very ability to feed your family is taken away from you because you might decline certain government dictates. Again, why are we not learning the lessons of history? Well, we're not learning because history is not being taught in our schools. That's deliberate, right? Deprive people of their own history. George Orwell said that. Anybody who's cluey knows this. Deprive people of their own history, and they're much more easy to manipulate and control. So you got all these things coming together. And it hasn't been accidental. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but again, Marxism has a history. And there's a lot of new ramifications of how this is working. And every day we see what's happening, and it's scary stuff. We have not learned from the past, and we're going to repeat the mistakes. And we managed to get through the Second World War. It cost a whole lot of lives, right? A whole lot of lives. 60 to 80 million dead to bring Hitler to an end. And then we had the Cold War. Praise God, the wall came down in 89, but that was 72 years of tyranny. But now we got this whole new thing we're up against, which, well, it's tyranny with a human face, right? Oh, we're here to protect you. We want to keep you safe. We want you to live longer. It sounds so good. I'm going to jump on board with that one. And guess what? Those people over there who don't wear their mask or don't get the vaccine or simply ask questions, they're the troublemakers. They're the ones who are causing us all of our grief. So you can easily see when they start persecuting all of us for simply asking questions, they'll actually think it's a good thing. We're concerned. We want to live. We want grandma to live. We don't want to kill grandma. So Jesus, by the way, if you know your gospel, said the same thing. One day they will come, they will put you in prison, they will even kill you and think they are doing God a service. And we got plenty of lefty Christians hopping on board, progressive Christianity. So, it's all there. And, it's a worry.
I think one of the things that has been really shocking and disorientating to the people that at least that I talk to is that for them it seems to have happened all of a sudden, and so they're playing catch up. And I've been not so much surprised, Excuse me, I'm going to cough for a second. Sorry. Um, not so much surprised, but wondering how I know what I know. You know what I mean? And there's like at the start of the corona, I said, yeah, the government in Victoria will probably be a much more harder response. They'll fight to extend the crisis. The crisis will change from an immediate crisis to a more long-term crisis, and then they'll try and permanently change legislation because of a temporary issue. And
Yep.
people came back to me and said, "Oh, you were right. How did you do that?" I was
Yeah.
like, it's really not that hard. You really just have to read the literature and see what happened in the past.
Yep. Yep.
So, for the person that has been blindsided, for the person that has now, excuse the term, awoken from their slumber,
Yep.
how can they start to get a grasp on the new reality that they've been thrust into? How
Yep.
can we catch up?
Yep. Well, information is key in a battle of ideas. Obviously, those who control the information can control the battle and win the war. The big picture item here, I always say there's two books we have to read. If you're not a Christian, you may not like the first, but reading the Bible actually gives you a pretty good handle and understanding, and the whole sweep of history. You can see exactly what's going on, what's causing these things, where it's heading. But even leaving aside that, the second book, the book of history, again, we have to learn from the lessons of history. We have to see what's gone before. If you've read even a little of Germany in the 30s, right? The world's most civilized, cultured, well educated society on the planet in 1930s Germany, right? What they do, they voted in Hitler, they gave the nod to the Nazis. So if it can happen then, it can happen anywhere easily. So learning from history, but obviously that's, well, controlling information, controlling the media. That's crucial. So we today talk about the two main camps: mainstream media, which is almost overwhelmingly secular left, hostile to everything we're talking about, and then what we call the alternative media, things like Fox News in America, Sky News in Australia. In my own very small way, Culture Watch website, 5,500 articles, your podcasts, great stuff, by the way. We do our bit to share the word, to get the word out, because you're not going to get it listening to the ABC, to SBS, reading the Melbourne Age, Sydney Morning Herald. You are not going to get the whole picture, very distorted picture. It's not just what they report and how they do it, but what they don't cover, right? They can simply distort the news by not reporting key things. So anyway, it's a big task of spreading the word, getting information out. I use Facebook, had 4,500 friends. I used it not to post pictures of my cat or my dogs, not to post pictures of my morning coffee, but to get truth out. Every day I'd do 20, 30 posts, whether a quote from somebody, a link to a great article, maybe a book review I just did. Well, I've been kicked off, so 4,500 friends have now lost my voice, but I'm hoping there's others there to take my place. Gab and MeWe are much smaller, obviously, so Facebook has a monopoly. So it's not just the mainstream media, it's the tech giants who now have monopoly powers. And when you have essential services in monopolies, well, in the old days, you had antitrust legislation. You said this is too important to let one group have complete control. But Facebook, YouTube, Google, Amazon, they effectively have control. MeWe would have a teeny fraction of the number of people Facebook does. But you use whatever means you can. So I speak, like I say, hopefully this weekend I'll be off speaking again. Sound the alarm. I write books, I write articles, but there's a million things we can do. If you go to podcasts, video casts, do that. The big picture, run for office. We need politicians. Become a school teacher, become a doctor, become a lawyer, entertainer. All the areas, in other words, that the other side deliberately took over. Gramsci said, let's target the institutions of power and influence. So guess what? They did. In confession time, I used to be an old radical and hippie, so I did the same. Back in my high school days, before I became a Christian, when my hair was almost down to my waist, we took classes in political science. Why? So we could take over politics. We took classes in journalism. Why? So we could take over the media. You know, we were evangelistic. We were on a mission. We knew we could capture the culture from within. And if we could do that, even with a minority of people, we could completely take it over. And guess what? We won. I hate to say it now because now I'm sorry. I have to apologize. But at the time, we won. And so now we are the new counterculture. You and me and anybody else listening, we are now on the fringes of society. We're on the edges, the counterculture. The mainstream is everything now that we're concerned about. People say, can we win? Well, in the long term, maybe. In the short term, probably not. I think it'll get much worse in the short term. But if the Lord should tarry, I say, look, when the early church was formed, it took hundreds of years. Paganism didn't disappear overnight. Hundreds of years, the church grew and expanded. And eventually you ended up with Western civilization, which was basically Christian civilization. The result of hundreds of years of the church being salt and light, having an impact. If we want to see that again today, well, it's probably going to take just as long. Now, mind you, it's not all bad news. The West is going down the tubes fast, sure, but God is still there. He's in Africa, Asia, Latin America. A lot of great things happening there. It's just that here in Melbourne, London, New York, Paris, it stinks. It's terrible what's happening right now. So whether the West can turn it around, well, we'll see. But God will keep working, and even if he has to do it through Africans coming to Melbourne or Asians, and that is exactly what's happening. You know, we're recycling the whole missionary effort. They came from Europe to the third world. Now they're coming back to re-evangelize Europe. So look, that's the big picture item, and the other side thinks in terms of the big picture, the long term and the big picture. We tend to think about what's for breakfast tomorrow. That's about as far as we can think ahead. Well, you know, I signed a petition once on same-sex marriage. Isn't that good enough for this year? Maybe next year I'll sign another petition. Guess what? We're not going to win with that mindset. We have to be like the other side. They're dedicated, they're committed, they're 100% involved with their cause, and they know it's a big job, a long term. So it's going to be the same for us.
You know, one of the things that I've tried to be thinking, okay, how can I encourage people to get started who probably don't have a history of activism or what I like to call getting off the couch? Because anybody can sign a petition, but that only works when you submit a petition to someone who's reasonable. If we're going increasingly to an unreasonable government who's unwilling to listen, petitions are going to be far less meaningful. So one of the things that I thought was to start a diary, and what better time than now to write your personal stories about how the corona stuff has impacted you and the lockdown and what you've seen and what you've thought and just to record stories, because I remember the first time I ever read Anne Frank's diary from the Second World War. She was a German teenager who was hidden by a family and eventually got busted, and she was murdered in one of the concentration camps. The impact of that little girl's diary was such a big eye-opener for me. Yeah. And I think that's what it's going to take, not so much the big stories, but everyone's little individual stories coming together so that we can build a community that when the time comes to stand, we can stand.
Yep.
Because I think we're at that balancing point. We're on the knife's edge. We're not quite done yet. But if we don't get ourselves moving over the next couple of years, it will be over. Yep. And there won't be a lot to bring us back.
No, absolutely. Values of story is important. The other side knows the place of story. I mean, postmodernism is all about, there's no meta-narrative. There's only your own personal narrative, your own little story. But yeah, they're important. They have their place. So yeah, whether it's the Rona, as you say, Sky News is often good. In the evenings, they'll bring in, a guy has a gymnasium or something, or a restaurant cafe, and how his business has been absolutely decimated by these lockdowns and all the rest. Just hearing their stories is really moving stuff. Last night, I think, well, both Peter Credlin and Paul Murray, one gal from Sydney flew in from the U.S. Her dad is dying, I think, in Victoria. But because of the two idiot governments in the two states, right, neither one wants to budge. Oh, you can't go from here to there. Who cares if your dad is dying and he's only got days to go? So they're making it hard on her. Eventually, they conceded and they said, "Well, look, get one of these fancy flights for $7,500. You can maybe fly in, see your dad before he dies." So there's evidently some mercy flights ministry. I forget what it's called. Some gal heard of the story. I think it was on the front page of the Daily Telegraph or something. She said, "Look, we will fly you from Sydney down to wherever in Victoria at our own expense so you can see your dad before he dies." Now, I can talk all I want about the stupid lockdown that we have, the studies that are showing, in fact, that lockdowns are actually counterproductive. They actually cause more harm than good. But getting a few stories like her, same thing with Queensland, people dying or people trying to go to their own wedding, or a child is born and the parents and the mother even couldn't even see the baby for the first week because of these idiot border closures. So those kind of stories, that's going to have an impact. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Write down, record, podcast your own story, whatever it may be, whether it's about the Rona, could be about your own life. A couple of years ago, I finally wrote my testimony down. 4-part, 10,000-word article, How I Became a Christian in 1971. In fact, in about a month and a half, it'll be a half century, 50 years ago in August, that I became a Christian, right? A bummed out, burned out hippie, high on drugs. Well, look, a lot of my friends didn't make it, either died of suicide or drug overdoses. I should have been the same. So whenever I speak, I talk about my story and I say, why me? Why was I spared? All my friends, most of them didn't make it. That's God's grace, obviously, but part of the story is 50 years ago, God knew, well, there's this guy named Joshua. One day you're actually going to teach him. One day he's going to start doing these really fantastic podcasts. He's going to give you a ring and say, Bill, you want to do a thing. So for that reason, that's part of the reason why I was not successful in my suicide attempt. So God's in charge of the big picture. We have to be faithful with the little. So yeah, telling those stories, that's a big part of sharing the word. Sure, if you want to do the worldview stuff, the apologetics, the whole intellectual debate, that's important as well. And some people will only be reached intellectually, but probably a lot more with just, your personal story.
So I want to close by you've been, I build you as the most hated activist in Victoria. I know some of the things that have happened to you and have happened to your family. And I recently was in contact with one of my members who was saying that, they have a history of depression, and this stuff that's going on is weighing them down, and they're scared that they might have another breakdown.
Yep.
And if people are thinking about moving into that space where they start to speak out or they start to do those things, they're going to get some pushback and they're going to get attacked. And some of that attack may happen from their neighbours, family, and friends.
Yep.
And so, as we close, I was just wondering if maybe you could give us some insight and some tips
Yep.
about how you've managed to keep going this long. I know your faith plays a very high degree, a high role in your ability to do that. But there's also that human side of you that gets hurt like the rest of us. I like to say Jesus may have been God, but he still bled.
Yeah. Yes.
And so how we're going to probably see more of that. And so how can we start to manage that and move through that?
Yep. No, very good question indeed. And yeah, I obviously agree. The faith component is really what makes it possible. Knowing God is there with you. It is a spiritual battle, so you pray. In fact, I know I've got, well, people right now praying for me, right? People all around the world. Even though I lost my 4,500 Facebook friends, I still got other connections. So just knowing right now as we're doing this interview, somebody in maybe America or London or somewhere is praying. So that's got to help big time. So yeah, look, I'm a human being. Um, I don't like the hate. I don't like the abuse. I don't like the death threats. And I get all three. Certainly the hate mail on a very regular basis. It's not fun. I'd rather sit home, read a book. You can see a few of them behind me. There's a whole lot more. In fact, I did a video once. You can find it on YouTube. If you want to have a tour of my library, all 7,500 books, you can check that out. But anyway, that's me. I'd rather sit home, read a book, have a cat on my lap. My cat is there on the floor right now. She's very upset. I got a laptop on my body. Where's the cat supposed to go? Oh, Joshua's fault. Sorry, Possum. Anyway, so, I don't like controversy. I don't like, it's funny. You think, oh, Bill, come on. You don't like controversy? You spend your life doing it. Well, yeah, well, it's God's calling. He gives you grace to do it. But yeah, you can't have a thin skin. If you're going to go into this, you know you will be attacked. And Jesus promised, right? Anybody who follows me, you will be persecuted. They hated me. Guess what? They will hate you. So part of the job description, sorry. If you want to really live a quiet and peaceful life, I don't suggest you do what I do or what you do, right? Not a good career path if you're going to, you just want to take it easy and have a good time, have everybody love you. Just don't speak out. Don't worry about what's happening in the world. Don't voice your concerns. It'll be fine. Well, temporarily, until we're all in the gulag anyway. But let me give you a good encouraging story, right? I got a lot of haters out there, a lot of trolls, a lot of hate mail. So let me tell you the story of one guy who was really the epitome of a hater. I think he was in England, homosexual, atheist, right? He had all the ticks on. He would always send in horrible comments, right? Just really nasty, vile, ugly, horrific comments. So at first I'd try to debate with him and, reason with him. But after a while, quickly in this business, you learn to discern, right? Is this guy open, asking honest questions, in which case he needs an honest answer? Or does he just like to argue and, he's just a troll, he's just out to get you? So you learn who's who. So I stopped printing his comments, but they kept coming for years. He hated me so much, he actually set up an entire website devoted to nothing but attacking me, right? He had a really gruesome picture of me on the page. I never looked at it. I'm not a masochist. Why, I don't want to, I was aware that it was there, but I didn't spend time looking at it. But he would, every day he'd post horrible attacks, lies about me. I'm the worst guy since Hitler. In fact, Hitler was probably better if you compared the two of us. So anyways, he had this website. So that was on for years and years. One day I got a comment, came through. All my comments I have to moderate first before I post them. And I thought, oh, here he is again, back again. Oh, dear. Richie, his name was. And he is quite amazing. He said, Bill, I've been doing some thinking lately. I've taken down my website. I realized everything I was doing and attacking you was really dumb and stupid and a waste of time. And, I'm not into that anymore. And, if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, that was a dumb thing to do. And, something like that. And I thought, wow, he was my biggest hater. It's kind of like a Saul Paul conversion almost. So I wrote back straight away, said, mate, of course I forgive you, of course. Such wonderful news to hear that you're maybe, shifting a bit, rethinking a bit. And he wrote back and he said, I was in tears. You really forgave me? After all the stuff I did to you and said to you, you forgave me? So I said, well, I'm looking now to find a Bible. I think I'll look for a church somewhere here in England. And I think I actually wrote up his story somewhere on my website. So I'm not quite sure where he's at now. So whether he became a Christian or he was on a journey to becoming a Christian. But I tell folks, hey, it's all worthwhile. If I can get 5 years of mud and dirt and filth and have entire websites devoted to attacking me and lying about me, if once or twice, maybe every couple of years, one of these guys comes around and says, wow, thank you for what you do, and thank you that you haven't thrown me under the bus. So I think it's funny. In fact, I still have plenty of other trolls who send in hateful comments, but I think it's funny. They're reading my stuff in order to spit their venom and hatred. Wow, that's a dangerous thing to do. When you read truth, guess what? It can stick, right? C.S. Lewis had something about that. It's a dangerous thing when you're an atheist, and he was an atheist for a long time. He said there's little snippets of truth everywhere. If you're not careful, it's going to smack you in the face. So later he did become a Christian. He said, I was the most reluctant convert in all of England. But yeah, truth has a way. I mean, you say, what can we do? How do we get the stories out? But truth, share truth. Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian dissident, right? He said, one word of truth will outweigh the whole world. 72 years and Marxism fell. The wall came down, 1989. Truth was spoken, truth was lived. We thought it would never happen, but it did. So yeah, let's keep speaking truth, and if they're hating on you, well, they still have to read some of your truth, and it might wear off on them. It might do some good. And of course, you have the extra benefit. If you are a Christian, you can pray, ask God for his supernatural help. So yeah, it's a war. We dare not take it lightly. It's an all-out battle, really, life and death battle that we're now in. And this is what, I'm an old guy, 68. I've never seen things as dark in my life as I see right now in the West. But it's possible God can turn it around. But he's going to need Joshua doing these neat podcasts. He's going to need me writing another article tomorrow. And he's going to need all of your listeners, one way or another, to get involved. Simply be concerned is a good start. Does this bother you? Does this worry you? Oh, good. That's a good place. Most people don't care. So at least if you care, well, then you just say, okay, what am I good at? Am I a filmmaker, poet, actor, artist, whatever? There's a million things we can do. So just start doing it.
That's excellent advice. Some people might think in my podcast, oh, Josh, you have a lot of Christians. And to be honest with you, I've emailed a lot of people who aren't Christians, and it's only the Christians who seem to email back. So maybe that says something. And I also say for the non-Christians that are working on it, I mean, you said that if you're Christian, you'll have people praying for you. I can say definitely, and I'm sure you would agree, that Christians, they're not they're not selfish with their prayers. They'll pray for anybody.
Yep.
And that's the good thing. You don't have to be a Christian to be loved by one.
Amen.
All right, Bill, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I really hope that my listeners check out Culture Wars. It's your blog, essentially. And you've been very diligent and you're very prolific. And a lot of your stuff is very profound also. And it's this cool mixture of reflection and your years of study, I can only imagine, as well as experience. They're very colourful articles, and a lot of them are very personal too.
Yep.
So there's a lot there for everybody, and I really recommend my listeners check that out at what is it, culturewars.com?
Culture Watch.
Culture Watch, sorry.
Yep.
Culture
Or just type in my name, either one. Maybe at the end of your little podcast, you can have it written down somewhere. But
absolutely, one of the hardest things with you, Bill, is for some reason I always forget how to spell your last name.
Well, I do too, so that's all right.
That's
I'm still struggling.
All right, Bill, you take care of yourself, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate.